Well, hello, everybody. Let's get going. So welcome to the ocean policy class. We're sitting in St. Petersburg at the College of Marine Science, University of South Florida. And we have a treat today. This is part of our ocean policy lectures on looking at the international dimensions of policy. And we have a panel today that's going to talk about Belizing the blue economy. This is a panel that is in part supported by the Strong Coast Project that Maya Trotz, the principal investigator, leads, and she's online. So welcome to our class. And Maya, do you want to say a few words?
Yeah, welcome everyone. I don't have much to say, but I do have a short video to play about the Strong Coast program. Strong Coast is about solutions with nature and people. We focus on coral reefs and mangrove forests as nature-based solutions and the co-benefits they provide. We do so in Miami, the U.S. Virgin Islands, and Belize. 3 very different places, different coastlines, economies, and relationships with nature. But in all 3 places, reefs and mangroves matter. In Miami, we are thinking about coastlines that have already been heavily shaped by people. In the U.S. Virgin Islands, there are challenges related to high-intensity hurricanes and the widespread loss of ecosystems. And in Belize, the conversation is ripe for managing the coastline. There, communities are facing pressure from development, sea level rise, sargassum, pollution, and storm surge. So the question is not just how to protect the shoreline, but what kind of coastline people want going forward, and whose priorities shape those decisions. We are pushing a very large team to think about convergence research. So this is about interdisciplinary work, community-partnered work, and it is about real capacity sharing. Success is not only about technical performance. It is also about whether people see themselves in the process, whether local knowledge is respected, and whether the benefits actually matter in that place.
Thank you, Maya. Maya, by the way, is a faculty member at the College of Engineering in Tampa at USF, and she's talking to us from Belize. We have a panel today, and I think this is going to be first introduced by Monique Vernon.
Yes, thank you. Good afternoon, class. I would like to first introduce the moderator for today, Ms. Nadia Bood. She is the Senior Program Officer and for Marine Science and Climate Change at WWF Mesoamerica, and she's also the Belize representative for WWF. Her work focuses on research and conservation that focuses on coral reefs, mangroves, integrated coastal zone management, marine spatial planning, blue carbon, climate adaptation across the Mesoamerica region. So without any further ado, please join me in welcoming Ms. Nadia Bood.
Thank you, Monique, and good afternoon, everyone. It's for those participating from Belize, it's still morning here, so good morning as well. It does gives me great pleasure to be able to moderate this panel today, where we will hear from 3 distinguished panelists from Belize on key themes related to blue economy implementation, conservation finance, and sustaining coastal ecosystems and communities. We have our panelists today include Ms. Beverly Wade from the Ministry of Blue Economy and Marine Conservation, Mr. Osmani Salas from the World Wildlife Fund Mesoamerica, and Dr. Leandra Cho Ricketts from the Belize Fund for a Sustainable Future. In terms of the run-off show for this panel, each panelist will have 5 minutes to present their respective topic. Following each presentation, I will pose a brief question before we move on to the next speaker. Once all presentations are made or concluded, we will then open the floor for audience questions and broader discussions. So without further ado, I would like to introduce our first panelist. Our first panelist is Ms. Beverly Wade, who is the Chief Executive Officer in the Belize Ministry of Blue Economy and Marine Conservation. Ms. Wade provides executive leadership for the ministry and oversees implementation of the Blue Economy Development Policy, Strategy, and Implementation Plan. She previously directed the Blue Bonds and Project Finance for Permanence Unit in the Office of the Prime Minister, where she led implementation of the Belize Blue Loan and Conservation Funding Agreements and coordinated key marine conservation commitments across government and civil society. Today, Ms. Wade will be presenting on implementation pathways for Belize's blue economy, including financing, coordination, enforcement, and community engagement.
Thank you. Pleasant good morning to the class. It's always a pleasure to speak to young people and to young people with a vested interest in our marine space. It's encouraging, especially for a country like Belize. And I am very proud to hear one of the participants, I believe is from Belize, that did the introductory remarks. So thank you, yes, and welcome. So I'll start with my very short, 5 minutes is a short time for me to talk about Belizing the blue economy, but I'll touch on a number of areas, and I'm sure we'll have a very fruitful, interactive discussion as we move ahead. So just in general, in terms of a national vision, Belize's economy on a whole is a nature-based economy. In fact, it is estimated that 70% of our economy is actually nature-based. And the blue space or the blue economy is no different. It's very much reflective of that. And so our blue economy sectors contribute to livelihoods, to export, to key sectors like tourism and fisheries, and to resilience on a whole, to climate change, climate variability. They are anchored really in key marine ecosystems, which are coral reefs, mangroves, and seagrass. And I'm very glad from the Strong Coast project that it shows that these ecosystems, at least two of them, serve the basis of a lot of the work that you're currently doing. So our policy choices are really guided by functional integrity of these ecosystems, a people-centered approach to conservation, and long-term value creation within our blue space and our blue economy. And Plan Belize and our National Blue Economy Framework aligns growth with effective ecosystem stewardship. So on a whole, it's estimated that our blue space currently generates over $1 billion US annually. As mentioned, they support livelihoods across the country. And it has been estimated by a recent study by the IDB that the blue space on a whole in Belize contributes 20% to our national GDP. And it helps safeguard our ecosystems for our essential ecosystems for future growth. So in terms of financing our blue economy, we tend to look strategically at financing for durable outcomes. And there are several areas, several pathways that we have employed and are currently employing in Belize. One of them, of course, is looking at how do we leverage, how do we monetize our very strong tradition and history of good environmental stewardship in Belize, and the fact that we actually have healthy, functional blue assets. And so one of the ways that we were successful in doing this was to look at our Belize Blue Bond, which was very much pioneering and trailblazing. At the time when we successfully negotiated our blue bonds, it was the largest blue bond globally. And since then, it has served as a tested model for other countries to now negotiate their own blue bonds, and actually led to the single largest blue bond negotiations or deal, which is Ecuador, and I believe Ecuador did theirs about 2 years ago. But basically, these results-based financing mechanisms are being looked at. You'll hear a little bit more from the PFP, from Mr. Salas, which is another example of a results-based financing mechanism, which actually looks at a blended approach to attract non-traditional financing partners, primarily the private sector, and also looking at a blended finance mechanism to now reinvest back into our natural capital in Belize. There are also financing that's coming to us through our CTFs, primarily like the Belize Fund and other trust mechanisms, which are helping us to bridge the recurring gaps. We're also looking at blue carbon, monetizing our blue carbon and biodiversity credits to unlock new revenue streams. And we're also looking at finance that's linked to measurable ecological and social outcomes. And so we're currently working with some of our MDB partners, in particular the World Bank and the IDB, to now look at developing an outcome-based financing framework for Belize, which, as I mentioned, links financing to private sector, to communities, to people, to institutions that are linked to measurable ecological and social outcomes. In terms of coordination across a multi-sectorial, multi-dimensional space is a must. It's critical. And so there are some key things that I wanted to highlight in terms of coordination across government and communities. One of them is that we have been working very much on creating these multi-sectorial plans. And two in particular are our Marine Spatial Plan, which is the Belize Sustainable Oceans Plan, which we are on schedule to finalize this year. And the second one is our Integrated Coastal Zone Management Plan. And what these plans do, they create a blueprint or a framework for key sectors to align sectorial development with conservation and wise use of our blue assets, and at the same time to ensure that we have the social impacts that we're meant to have by the development of our blue economy. There's also the cross-ministry coordinations, which is very important for us to strengthen various policies and developmental plans across the blue space and our blue economy to ensure that we are effective and efficient with implementation, and also to ensure that there's coherence in the implementation. And we currently have a draft blue economy bill, which we're expecting to advance to Cabinet and Parliament within the next couple of months. And basically what this bill does is to now legislate the primary role of the Ministry of the Blue Economy, which is this cross-ministerial, cross-sectorial coordination to ensure that the blue economy framework, its policy, strategy, and plan is mainstream and is integrated across various ministries and various sectors in their programs and also in development. The most important, well, not most important, but very important, also important, is the science policy interface, which helps us. It helps us in ensuring that we're more effective with adaptive management and that our decision making is well informed. And so there are these mechanisms within that blue economy bill that are now that are going to be established to facilitate this interface, to ensure that there is that relationship with science and that science feeds into our policy making and feeds into our management. And finally, of course, there's a community co-management. And when I say co-management, I mean co-management in the general sense. A lot of people tend to align co-management with area-based management, and that's just really one form of co-management. But co-management for us is much broader than that, and it's an approach which ensures legitimacy and shared stewardship and ownership of our blue space, our blue resources, and our blue economy at the end of the day. And so there is a dedicated effort to ensure that we also have clearly defined mechanisms and clearly defined procedures to integrate communities into decision making and to integrate communities into our work within the blue economy. In terms of enforcement, compliance, and trust, this is extremely important, because at the end of the day, trust is something that we are constantly working on. There's natural tension whenever you have a regulatory framework or a management framework for a space that is touching on livelihoods with those stakeholders or even actors who are looking at developing within the space. And so one of the main things that we've been working on is the finalization of our National Fisheries Enforcement and Conservation Monitoring Strategy. And that strategy looks at how do we integrate seamlessly operations of key institutions, not only with on-the-ground enforcement and regulatory mandate, but those institutions that are now identified to now oversee the direct implementation of multi-sectoral plans like the Coastal Zone Management Authority. Compliance, we found from our experience that compliance works best when communities see the benefits and there's a clear structure which speaks to fairness at the end of the day. And so we are envisioning that this national enforcement and conservation strategy will now enable the employment of a transparent and a fair approach to enforcement and to compliance and build trust at the end of the day. Another area that we're looking at is data transparency. Data transparency supports accountability and investor confidence at the end of the day. And so we are working very diligently within the Fisheries Department and within the Coastal Zone Management Authority and the ministry itself to work on key areas. One, data sharing agreements. Two, the establishment of a Blue Economy Monitoring Center, which is expected to be housed within the Coastal Zone Management Authority. And it is going to function like a hub that is now processing information from the blue economy, from the blue space, and having that information available to the public. We're working along with the National Statistical Institute that we're hoping will now adopt on their dashboard an entire area that now tracks key KPIs within the blue economy and within the blue space that should be available to the public, to academia, to anybody who wants to have information on what is happening within the blue space. And so we are working very much on opening up how we treat data and also how we now use data in terms of supporting accountability and also in terms of supporting actors that are in the space. And at the end of the day, we are now looking forward to having these important frameworks, these important initiatives in space in place so that we can protect our ecosystems, we could protect key sites that are important for productivity, and at the end of the day, support and safeguard livelihoods. So, in general, as I said, very excited for this conversation, because for us, we see you as our future leaders. And our key message to you from the Ministry of the Blue Economy is that the future of Belize's blue economy depends on leaders fluent in science, policy, and finance, and that innovation must be grounded in communities and ecosystems, and protecting our blue capital is nation building. And finally, and most importantly, Belize offers a living laboratory for global relevant ocean solutions. There's no other place like Belize. We are trailblazing on all of these various pathways and in blue economy development. And we look forward to continue to inspire young students like yourself. And we welcome you to be a part of this very important and exciting journey. Thank you.
Thank you. We can't hear you, Nadia.
I think you're muted, Nadia.
Thank you, Beverly. CEO Wade, for the very comprehensive presentation that captures well the theme around enforcement, finance, and engagement. One question, Beverly, that I want to pose, and if you're able to answer this in like 1 minute, that will be great. No, and we can expand on it during the discussion stage. But my question for you is, in your view, where are the biggest opportunities to strengthen implementation around financing, coordination, enforcement, and community buy-in?
Sure. So I'll take them one at a time. With regards to financing, I think Belize is at a sweet spot currently. We not only were trailblazing with showing how we could actually develop these results-based financing mechanisms that are anchored in nature, but we have been very successful in showing that it can work, both from our financial obligation standpoint and from the standpoint of delivering on key conservation targets that are associated with a deal like the Blue Bonds deal. And so what that has done is to create a very high level of credibility within the financing space, not only with our traditional financiers, the grants, the grant community or the multilateral financing, but it has also now created credibility within the private sector, which is a sector globally that a lot of countries, institutions have been trying to tap into to play a more meaningful role. And so we have created a kind of a high level of confidence and rebranded Belize as a country that is ready for investments and is ready for innovation in terms of financing. And so I think that this is one of the areas that has the most potential for us and has the most potential for us to tap into non-traditional financing that can also be leveraged with some of our traditional financing to fill the gap that is required for us to be successful at the effective management of our blue assets, and at the same time to have the kind of blue economic development that we would want to have in Belize, no? So I think that is one of the areas that for us we're vigorously pursuing this innovative kind of thinking towards financing our blue economy. The other area that you were talking about with regards to enforcement is that we actually have a good foundation on the ground in terms of strategic partnership and also with regards to coordination. And I think that with the finalizing of our national enforcement strategy, that we would now have a more structured approach to enforcement, and which at the end of the day, we see resulting in greater compliance. It's an approach that we believe will be very transparent, but also will be able for us to be more effective with resources. Resources are scarce, but the framework allows us to be more structured and allow us to be more coordinated. And I think this is another one of our opportunities. It is important for our donor partners because they can now have an understanding of exactly our approach to enforcement, and also important for our underground partners who continue to be critical in terms of presence and in terms of enforcement, and of course, encouraging compliance with our stakeholder base. And finally, in terms of community, I think that the government has been very clear in terms of adopting a people-centric conservation agenda. And at the highest level, the government of Belize have really said that our work must be for nature and people. And so it's a mandate at the highest level for us to ensure that we're now integrating into our policies, our plans, and our programs, the people part of things. So all the work that we're doing is to ensure that we take on board what are the considerations and the voices of the people. And I believe this is one of the biggest opportunities that we have, to coordinate around that central mandate that has been given to us, and to ensure that we now put in the mechanisms and we now have integrated into our policy what is needed to have the voices from the communities heard, and for them to be a part of our programs and our solutions. We're a very small country, and the people capital is very important if we're going to be successful. And people can be integrated at all levels of blue economic development in Belize.
Thank you, CEO Wade. Great inputs, and we look forward to the discussion feeds of the panelists in the panel discussion. I would also like to extend a great thank you to all the participants attending today's panel discussion. Online, we have around 40 participants joining us. And we have those that are within the room right now in Dr. Muller's course. Then we'll move on to the second panelist. The second panelist is Mr. Osmane Salas. Mr. Salas is the lead for the Belize Project Finance for Permanence at World Wildlife Fund Mesoamerica. He leads the team responsible for developing and closing the agreement in coordination with the government of Belize, investors, civil society, and local communities. Mr. Salas also represented Belizean NGOs in the Belize Senate from 2017 to 2022. Today, Mr. Salas' presentation will focus on using conservation finance to create durable, long-term outcomes for Belize. Over to you, Mr. Salas.
Thank you very much, Nadia. Maya, thank you very much for inviting me to speak to the class. It's a real pleasure to have the opportunity to share this information with you, and also to see a fellow Belizean sitting in the classroom. That's exciting. And everybody else that have signed on to the webinar. I want to share some information about one of the mechanisms that Beverly referred to in her presentation, and it's about Project Finance for Permanence initiative, which in Belize we call Resilient Bold Belize. PFPs for short, Project Finance for Permanence initiatives, are large-scale initiatives that aim to secure major commitments from government and other partners and stakeholders in what we call a single closing that brings everybody together to ensure the large-scale systems of conservation are not only well managed, but are are financed for the long term. And I'll speak a little bit about that sustainable financing idea, but also very importantly, based on what Beverly said about the importance of having a people-centric conservation agenda to ensure that communities that depend on the resources are benefited in perpetuity. So Resilient Bold Belize has three major features, as all PFPs do. One is a conservation plan that sets out the priorities of the initiative over the long term. In the case of Resilient Bold Belize, it's a 10-year plan that sets out all the goals, objectives, and defines the activities that will be implemented over 10 years. Based on that conservation plan, there's a financial model that sets out the costs for implementing the conservation plan. But not only that, but identifying what the baseline of funding is, what is available at this time, and what the funding gap is, and where those resources will come from, and how those resources will be allocated during the implementation of the initiative. And finally, there's an operating or operations manual that describes the governance structure and provides the main guidelines for implementation of Resilient Bold Belize. So these are three major components of the initiative that will need to be agreed to with government and other partners before we can start to implement. So over the past several years, we've been designing the initiative, including the conservation plan, the financial model, and the operating manual. And we hope to be able to launch this initiative this year so that implementation could commence. So the conservation plan, we've defined a goal for the 10 years of that plan, and it is to build a long-term resilience of Belize's connected marine and coastal ecosystems through effective management of protected areas, restoration of ecosystems, but also generating nature-based opportunities to support the well-being of Belizeans. Based on this goal, we've defined 5 key pillars to this initiative. The 5 key pillars are protected areas, livelihoods and stewardship, fisheries management, coastal ecosystem resilience, and sustainable financing. Just to focus briefly on livelihoods and fisheries management, the livelihoods pillar aims to increase the resilience and stewardship of over 10,000 people in what we call the targeted communities through building financial resilience of households, but also empowering and increasing participation of people in coastal marine conservation. In the fisheries management, besides strengthening and improving enforcement and compliance mechanisms and data collection and analysis, importantly, a major focus of that is to strengthen fisher organization and participation in decision making. And I wanted to highlight that because of the importance of this along the lines of this being a people-centric agenda. No? The sustainable financing pillar aims to ensure that once the PFP 10-year implementation period has ended, there are financial resources available to continue supporting the conservation impacts over the long term. So what will be the cost of implementing this PFP and its conservation plan? We've estimated that the cost over the next 10 years will be about $144 million US dollars. The funding to come from 3 main sort of buckets, if I could call them that. Donor funding, which is to serve as transition funding, also government funding, and support from other stakeholders. The donor funding will come through a number of different sources, primarily from private donors, but also from public donors such as the GEF, Global Environmental Facility, and we've secured two GEF projects and grants for the PFP as already. But also government funding, aligning funding from the government to support implementation over the 10 years, and new or expanded funding through reforming protected area entrance fees and other mechanisms that would be developed and instituted during the implementation of the PFP, but also support from other partners as well. Both the Belize Fund that Beverly referred to and that Leandra represents, and she'll speak after me, and also from co-managers through co-financing. So the donor funding, and I'll end with this slide, is to provide transition funding so that the implementation of this initiative can commence. And as the name suggests, it will be transitional so that during the implementation of the plan, other mechanisms will kick in, other sustainable financing mechanisms. The main one we're working towards to ensure that we institute within the first year or two of implementation is optimized park entrance fees, so that the incremental revenue from these fees can go towards supporting the priorities of the PFP and its conservation plan. And there will be time to explore and look at other mechanisms that can be put in place that should gradually over time replace the need for the transition funding. So just to the transition funding, which will be about just under 61 million US dollars, will be managed by an independent fund manager. In this case, the independent fund manager will be the Belize Fund that Dr. Leandra represents. And we are working very hard with our partners to set out all the institutional architecture for how this will be put in place. There are a number of commitments that we are working hard with government and other partners to ensure that they are in place before the launching of this initiative can be done. There are some examples of closing conditions on the screen. They won't all necessarily apply to Belize, but one of them that is very important is that new or expanded financial mechanisms should be put in, and that there's a governance body, in this case the Belize Fund, to implement the transition or to administer the transition funding. And another key feature is that there will be disbursement conditions or milestones over the 10 years of implementation of the PFP to ensure that we are on track. And one of those is that new financing mechanisms or expanded financing mechanisms would be developed and deployed during the implementation of the PFP, but also ensuring that community economic development, community economic benefits are put in place and maintained over time, because it's to ensure that this is indeed people-centric. People need to benefit from this. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to you.
Thank you, Osmani. I just want to pose a short question to you, and I would like you to respond very briefly as well. And it's probably going to be a recap, of what you have said before too, in a sense. Knowing that traditionally conservation finance have been very, short term on a project by project basis. With that in mind, what do you see as key strategies that can enable conservation finance to shift from short-term initiatives towards sustained long-term outcomes?
Yeah, thank you, Nadia. That's a very important question. And that's one of the main things that PFPs aim to address. How do we move from short-term project-specific, project-based finance to having more long-term durability in terms of financing? So what I will say to add to what I've already said is that we need to ensure that we have mechanisms that are dedicated to continue providing financing, so that these conservation initiatives and impacts to be maintained over the long term, so that we can then focus on what's really important, not just every 3 years, every 2 years, or even every 5 years, but that we can focus on putting in place real important initiatives on the ground for communities, for biodiversity, for nature. I've worked in protected areas most of my professional life, and the financing gap has always been there hanging over everybody, where funding will come from year to year to pay salaries, to pay for fuel, etc. So what PFPs aim to do is to ensure that core funding needs can be met over the long term so that we can focus on what really matters. We could go on and on, but I'll end there, noting that we have limited time. Thank you, Nadia.
Thank you too, Osmani. And please forgive my purpleness. It means that I'm happy to be participating in this webinar. Sorry, my camera is acting it's a little bit glitchy. We'll then move on to our third panelist for this webinar. Our third panelist is Dr. Leandra Chuck Ricketts. Dr. Ricketts is the Executive Director of the Belize Fund for a Sustainable Future, a private conservation trust fund that supports marine conservation, scientific research, and climate adaptation in Belize. She leads the fund's long-term strategy, operations, and grant-making programs. Dr. Chuck Ricketts co-founded the University of Belize Environmental Research Institute and previously served as the director of the Coastal Zone Management Institute and Authority and Institute. For more than 2 decades, she has helped advance marine science and conservation in Belize. Dr. Chuck Ricketts' presentation will focus on sustained financing, bridging the funding gap for ocean conservation and blue economy in Belize. Over to you, Dr. Ricketts.
Hey, thank you very much, Nadia, for that introduction, and good afternoon, everyone that's participating. I'd like to start off by thanking Maya and Frank for this invitation to share with you a little bit. 5 minutes is a tough timeline, but I'll try my best. A little bit about the work we're doing in Belize and the work through the Belize Fund. The aim is to give you an overview of how some of these mechanisms you heard Beverly spoke about and are working and linking into some of what Osmani spoke about. So I'm segueing from their presentation, and it's looking at how sustainable financing for ocean governance and blue economy works or is working here in Belize, and how Belize made that possible. So just will give you a brief overview of the fund, touching on how we got to this sustainable financing or sustained financing, and how the Belize Fund is working to ensure that we have that impact towards ocean governance and blue economy. So the Belize Fund, who we are, you heard already, we're a private conservation trust fund, and trust funds across the world are mechanisms that help to enable funding. They're transparent, accountable, independent mechanisms that can move funding, conservation financing, whether from multilaterals like government entities or the GEF, the Global Environmental Facility, or whether it's private funding. They're able to move them through the systems and the processes that they have in place to get on the ground. And so the Belize Fund was established in 2022, March, so we're celebrating our 4th year. And our purpose was to provide that mechanism to transition perpetual financing into marine conservation. And the goal is to strengthen Belize's biodiversity, ecosystems, and coastal communities to ensure that the country meets its national targets and also global commitments. So quickly, what has the fund been doing in that 4 years? Since we started passing funding in 2022, we have invested in $13.5 million US into projects, and we've dispersed out $12.4 million of that. And how we work is we support government through funding that goes directly to government, and that's $7.1 million, and then so far $6.4 million to non-government groups. And that has supported over 614,000 hectares of protected areas across 14 marine protected areas, and through working with 48 communities and across 30 projects. So that's an overview of that. Jumping in, I won't go through all this detail here, but touch on the main areas that we have supported. So we've supported fishing communities and associations. We've supported women-led businesses working with seaweed, mariculture. We have supported coral restoration work and other climate resilience building, looking at seagrass protection. Of course, a large part of this has gone into marine protected area management, things like enforcement, the science, patrols, and so forth. So a quick overview of this financing mechanism. How is Belize able to have this money flowing into marine conservation and the blue economy? It came through the blue bonds for ocean conservation, or the blue loan agreement, where debt was repurchased and at a 45% discount. So that gave a savings, and the government committed to achieving certain marine conservation targets over the next 20 years. And part of that savings is going into funding this. So the Belize Fund was created coming out of this agreement as that trust fund to manage these funds and ensure that it goes towards achieving the commitments and that it boosts and builds the blue economy and supports effective ocean governance. So over 20 years, 180 million US is what the fund will be managing and investing into the blue space. So this financing has unlocked for 20 years sinking funds totaling 80 million, and that equates to about 4 million a year US that the fund will receive, will manage. And of that, we are unlocking 3.2 million. So 80% of that is going directly back into grant making. Beyond the 20 years, in 2041, there is a 90 million US endowment that the fund will receive and will continue to manage as an endowment, but the proceeds from that, so the investment interest earned, which we're projecting would be approximately 4 million US, would be continuously invested into ocean governance and into the blue economy. So that's the concept of the sustained financing. This is expected, as long as those investment returns continue, that we would have financing in perpetuity. And the fund is partnering to leverage this secured core financing with other initiatives and partnerships like the PFP. As you heard, the chunk of this, or the core part of the funding, is being leveraged as funds to support that the PFP and that are aligned with that. So how does the funding enable Belize to meet its targets? There are certain milestones in the Blue Bonds Agreement. There are 8 of them. I won't go through in detail, but just to give an overview that these milestones all help us to achieve the 30% protection of our marine space by 2030. And actually, Belize will be achieving that before 2030. And also to develop a marine spatial plan, which guides the use of our ocean space. 2 very important components to what the country needs to advance its blue economy. And of course, the funding that the Belize Fund manages is all tied into supporting the achievement of those 8 milestones. So our grant making looks at government support, and that government support is funding that directly helps the government to meet those commitments, and that's through multi-year funding. And then we have a grants award program, which is the non-government funding, and that goes to communities, to NGOs, community-based groups, fishing associations, women's groups. It also goes to academia, universities, other tertiary level institutions, and MSMEs, micro, small, and medium enterprises, so businesses. And the funding that we channel in order for the non-government partners, or through the grants award program, to ensure that funding is aligned with and is supporting the government in achieving the commitments and the country. we have 4 thematic areas around which the grants are made: protection for biodiversity, sustainable fisheries, climate resilience, and blue business innovation. And as you can see, these are all very important pillars of ocean governance. And the last one in particular, the blue business innovation, is directly looking at how we can help boost our blue economy development. So the fund, looking back and sharing some of our experiences and touching on this, how the funding can ensure that development of the blue economy in particular. In our first couple years, we had a trend of large NGOs were the entities that were able to, mainly the entities able to access this funding because they had the experience, they had the governance structures, and they were legally established. And that there was this big gap amongst community groups. They didn't have all the capacity necessary that CTFs, Conservation Trust Funds, look for when they are awarding funding, right? You have to be able to report on it. You have to be able to use it to achieve the results that it was intended for. So the fund realized that we needed to be more adaptive and flexible, and we developed some tailored funding windows for the community groups and micro enterprises. And this window allows them, it's a smaller pot of money because they don't have the capacity to handle large quantities. But we also ensure that we provided proposal writing support for them. The fund conducts the financial management, so they don't get the funding in hand, but rather we manage the funding and cover costs, purchase equipment, procure any other services they need, and give mentoring support to them to help them build those skills so that they are able or will be able down the road to access funding directly. We're also partnering with other local institutions here. There's a development bank that we are working with to roll out a blended finance program that looks at giving more direct access to individuals through a rebate program. So it's looking at loans, a loan program that development bank has, and combining it with a rebate that's performance-based or outcome-based. So the fishers would have to comply with certain requirements or meet certain requirements to access that funding. So the Belize Fund has worked to develop strategies that can help build community involvement in governance by strengthening how they're organized, how they're structured, helping them to register, and also in helping to develop their blue business capacities. And learning from this, the fund is currently at a stage where we're developing our program impact strategy. And what this is a strategy to guide for the next 5 years how the Belize Fund will be investing this funding to ensure that it achieves the intended impacts to improve ocean governance, to build the blue economy. And so these are some areas so far that have been coming out as key thematic areas that the fund should consider or should be looking at in the next 5 years. Of course, marine protected areas and biodiversity protection is key. We need to be ensuring that we are conserving these areas to keep reaping the benefits like fisheries and tourism and other mariculture areas. Having sustainable blue economy livelihoods is also key because that is a big focus. As you heard Beverly mention, the government's focus is on people and nature, and livelihoods are a big part of that. Coastal zone governance and development, as the marine spatial plan rolls out, it's important to have community involvement in that, and especially in the local communities along the coast, building their capacity to understand how to respond to climate change impacts, things like erosion, but also be able to manage our mangrove areas and ensure that we can retain these natural systems that help protect us and have more effective development. And then finally, all these systems require data and monitoring and managing this data. And the fund is in a position to be able to assist in setting up our funding to set up such platforms, training for whether it's community universities, new resource managers to be able to take that data, analyze it, and use it for decision making. So with that, I will end there, and thanks for your attention.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ricketts. I have one question too to pose to you before we open up the room for the discussion and question and answering stage from the audience. My question to you, Dr. Ricketts, is what scientific and institutional capacities does Belize most urgently need to strengthen if we are to have effective long-term ocean governance and sustainable blue economic growth?
Okay, that's a loaded question there. There's a lot you could dive into, but from the work of the fund and what we've been seeing and where we feel we can assist, I think it more has to do with seeing how we can build the capacity to take this data, because Belize has a lot of data. There's a lot of people collecting reef health data, fishes data, looking at manatees, sharks. How do we take that data and convert it into useful metrics that not just the government can use for decision making, but also communities like our tourism sector, our fisheries sector. So how we need to build that capacity to have those platforms and systems available for the entire public to access. And I note that Beverly mentioned the Ministry of Blue Economy is working towards such a platform. But then we also need to keep building our local in-country capacity. So training students to be able to do that analysis, because we need the human resources to be able to do that, to run these platforms and systems. And then at the community level, I think it's important to build community awareness and knowledge about this information and how to understand what it's saying and how to access and use it. Because for many years, we focused just on building technical capacity amongst government practitioners, NGO co-managers, but communities also need that knowledge because they're the users. And if they don't have that knowledge to know to make wise choices and understand why it's important, we will always have a challenge in trying to ensure that we have effective management because people are important in achieving that.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Ricketts. One question that I also want to pose to the three panelists. My question is, what does success look like when science, policy, and finance are working together to support Belize's coast? Can we start with you, CEO Wade?
Sure. Very briefly, thriving, successful blue economy that's anchored in healthy and functional ecosystems and people who are successful and are benefiting from having thriving ecosystems and also having in place the kind of support and enabling environment for them to access resources and benefit from those resources. And so, in my view, that is what we would have if we have the finances, if we have the science to inform pathways, management, and decision making, and also if we have people who appreciates and value stewardship and the fact that they are able to benefit from a well-managed space.
Thank you, CEO Wade. Mr. Salas?
Thanks, Nadia. Just very briefly, and to add to what Beverly said, to achieve permanence, we have to think beyond financing, beyond permanent or sustainable financing. Financing alone will not achieve permanence. We also need to have the right policies in place. Strengthen legislation where we see it is needed. And as CEO had said before, as Beverly said before, also scientific support, right? So all that needs to come together if the impacts, the benefits to communities are to be maintained over the long term.
Thank you, Mr. Salas. Dr. Ricketts?
I think both Beverly and Osmani have done a great job answering that. I think the only addition I would want to make is what would be another key element is the well-being of communities. And well-being speaks not just to livelihoods, but in terms of their health and their whole emotional outlook on life. And I think that has a lot with how they're engaged and involved in the process too.
Great. Thank you very much to the three panelists. And now we'll open it for the question and answer stage of the webinar. Within the Q&A section, I noticed that there have been two questions posed. Let me read those out. The first question is, it was very okay. Can you provide more information on the specific ways that community priorities and needs are being collected, as well as to what degree their priorities are being included in the Blue Economy Framework? I think maybe Beverly, it's the CEO with. Can you share on that?
The specific ways in which a community are what? Integrated in the framework?
Can you provide more information on the specific ways that community priorities and needs are being collected, as well as to what degree their priorities are being included within the Blue Economy Framework?
Sure. So as a part of the framework that's being put in place, we have integrated into our approach specific processes to ensure that communities, sectorial needs are fed into these major framework policies and documents. So for instance, the Belize Sustainable Oceans Plan, there's an entire governance process that subscribes to consultations at various levels in communities, one. Also in terms of the decision-making framework for the Belize Sustainable Ocean Plan, there is various working groups and mechanisms to ensure that communities are brought to the table. There are specific mechanisms such as the Fisheries Advisory Council that also ensures that the fishing community, which is one of our primary user groups, are brought to the table. And there are other focus groups within the Coastal Zone Management Authority and the Fisheries Department. But I will say that as a part of our Blue Economy Bill, which we're hoping to be passed very soon, there is a mechanism referred to as the Blue Economy Cluster. And that cluster is meant for cross-coordination across communities, various stakeholder groups within the blue space. And so that mechanism will be legislated, and it's a permanent space for users and community groups to be able to sit as we continue to implement the Blue Economy Framework.
Thank you, CEO Wade. There is also a follow-up question to that one.
Before you do that, could we just ask, I know the class is watching. I don't think they have an ability to type questions. So
okay,
let's see if they have any questions too, and we could ask them.
Sure. So we can open it up to the class to see if they have any questions.
Well, I have a question.
Sure. Please proceed, Frank.
Maybe Dr. Joe Ricketts or any one of the other panelists. And I'm going to ask a very, very simple question, but I would like to know what are the first steps that you need to do to set up a blue bond or a biodiversity credit scheme?
I think that one is, I'll pass that one to Beverly because she was directly involved in developing that, the blue bonds.
So one of the things that we are looking at in Belize is looking at monetizing biodiversity credits. It is one of the things with biodiversity credits is that it is getting traction on the markets, but it's still not necessarily defined. And so from a credit standpoint, it might be a little bit difficult to set up like a bond for it. But what I do know we're looking at is to look at how do we now qualify these credits? How do we now integrate it along with blue carbon credits? Or if there's an opportunity for us to look at them on their own and to see how we're able to then trade those credits, which I guess is similar when you look at it from a bond. It's a financial, it is going to be shaping it into a financial instrument, but not necessarily as a bond yet. It can be looked at in terms of a more holistic approach to a particular objective where you are including biodiversity credits in it. But for the time being, we're still looking at the feasibility of how to approach biodiversity credits. And what we've seen right now on the markets is the ability to stack biodiversity credits along with carbon credits, but also to look at them on their own as a part of a bigger project design for an area with other conservation outputs and goals.
Thank you. I'm very interested in this, and especially from the point of view of looking at standards and how to organize this at a global level.
Yes. There are standards that are already being looked at on the voluntary carbon markets. I believe Vera already have some standards for biodiversity that they're looking at biodiversity credits. And so they're currently being crafted. There are only some voluntary markets that are starting to look at them on their own, but it's a very dynamic and evolving process right now.
Beverly, I'll follow up with you.
Yes.
Are there any other questions? So, sorry, Nadia, we can go back, but just to be sure, we only have about 7 minutes left in the period. So let's finish on time, but we can go back to the questions.
Okay. We'll try to, there is one other question, there's another question posed in the Q&A, and we in the interest of time, we need to keep it brief, of course, no, in terms of the response. I'm going to read it out, Beverly, for your benefit, no? The question posed is, first of all, there was a couple of statements. So let me just read the entire thing. Thank you for the presentation. The Blue Bond Act includes provision for the revision of the Environmental Protection Act's environmental regulations, specifically the environmental impact assessment. Since the Department of Environment met last May, there has been no further public discussion about those revision. Then he went on to say, in the interim, we have seen projects impacting the marine space get the green light within the marine protected areas, most recently in the Holchan Marine Reserve and in the approval of the cruise ship port project. That would involve the dredging of over 8 million cubic meters of sediments. So that, you know, that was the prelude to his question. He said, what changes are your organization urging for the respect to No, urging for in respect to environmental protection within the eventual revision of the Environmental Protection Act and its regulations. And the other, yeah, and there's a follow-up question. Maybe how do you reckon you can maintain the commitment of the Blue Bond with the continued prevalence of projects having substantive impacts on our marine ecosystems?
Sure. So a couple of things. The Blue Bond Act, it specifically required government of Belize to make amendments to the EIA regulations as it relates to the outstanding universal value of the World Heritage property in Belize. Those amendments were made. So since the Blue Bond Act has come in place, the EIA process for screening and for looking at developments should now look at it alongside the universal outstanding value of the World Heritage Site to ensure that the screening has taken into consideration the potential impacts on that outstanding universal value. So now there's a requirement for each EIA to have a section to state what are the potential impacts on the outstanding universal value of World Heritage property in Belize, and what are the mitigation efforts that are being recommended to address those potential impacts. So the legislation was revised to reflect that, and it has been in place for some time now. With regards to the EIA regulations on a whole, we've acknowledged collectively that there are gaps. There are gaps in the current regulations. And yes, one of the reasons why the EIA regulations have not moved is because when they did that revised regulations, institutions like our ministry and other stakeholders have said, we want to take this opportunity to do a better revision of the EIA regulations to be more holistic and to fill in some of the gaps that we did not think the current revised regs, as the DOE had done, did it. And so there is that general commitment that we should now go back to those regulations and to look at it, especially for us from the Blue Bonds perspective. We have a unique interest also that the EIA regulations should take into consideration, just as it did with the outstanding universal value of the World Heritage Site. It should now integrate important, more holistic planning instruments such as the BSOP, such as the ICZMP, and such as the National Land Use Policy that has been recently adopted. And so we're saying that if it integrates these, it allows that screening process to be more comprehensive and more holistic in terms of identifying potential impacts and in terms of being consistent with what the recommendations from these planning tools are, planning instruments are really recommending.
Thank you.
Nadia, given the time, do you mind if I jump in and give a quick reaction to the last question?
Okay, a quick one.
Right. The last question is a very important one, asking about how we see strategic communications, education, and outreach contributing to behavior change, and any plans to expand funding or partnerships with NGOs in that respect. In the context of the PFP, to the Resilient Bold PFP, I wanted to mention that the way implementation is being designed, it will be local partners that will be implementing. And when I say local partners, I mean the relevant government agencies, the co-managing NGOs, and very importantly, local organizations such as fisher associations and the newly established National Fisher Network of Belize as an example. So it is anticipated that organizations such as those, community-based organizations, will be integrally involved in implementing. and to have partnerships, to have partnerships set up with them. So I just wanted to make that quick intervention.
Thank, thank you very much. And we've reached our time available for this webinar. There was one other questions we have that we can, I can pose it here and maybe we could send it to the students of Frank's class. And that question was, what advice would you give students who want to work at the intersection of ocean science, policy, and conservation? We can collect those responses from the panelists via email, and then we can then share it with the class, given that we are out of time. I'd like to take the opportunity to thank the panelists for participating in this very important webinar. Can I turn it over to you, Frank?
Yeah, thank you, Nadia, and I want to thank you and Maya and all the panelists for participating today. This has been very informative, and as you see, as we just started to touch on the really difficult questions, we had to close the session. So, but we will come back next week and we will have a community perspective on all of this. So the 16th of April, same time, same channel. I welcome everybody to participate. Thank you, and thanks for the students here. So thank you, everybody.